Welcome on behalf of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. My name is Andrea Orlando, and I'm Encore Fellow for Hacer Communications. Our final webinar for 2021 focuses on allyship. This concept has become such a popular topic that dictionary.com has named the word allyship the word of the year. In this webinar, we'll dive a little deeper than the definition and explore how you can strengthen these beneficial relationships. We hope that by the end of this, you'll take away some practical information to help you convert your colleagues into diversity and inclusion allies, or become a better ally yourself, or do both. We're so fortunate to have Salesforce and PepsiCo as sponsors for this important discussion today. And with that, I'd like to introduce a brief video from our sponsor, PepsiCo.
They might be called Hispanic small businesses, but there's nothing small about them. And at PepsiCo, there's nothing small about our commitment to small businesses, because there's nothing small about their commitment to their community, to become an extension of its voice and their desire to move forward. For their familia, for their gente. With funds, grants, and coaching, we stand by their side every step of the way. Porque juntos crecemos.
Thank you, PepsiCo, for your continued support. We'd also like to thank our next sponsor, Salesforce. Please enjoy this brief video.
We are missing. We are missing from so many rooms, classrooms, boardrooms, everything in between. But we are here. We are programmers and coders, animators and analysts, engineers and entrepreneurs, designers, builders, creators, the bringers of change. We are here. We are here leading. We are here innovating. We are here working for our vision of better companies, communities, and countries. We are here. We have always been here. Our stories, our voices, our ideas have always mattered, more than mattered. And we won't stop asking more of the spaces that need to make space for more like us. All of us, all different types of us.
Thank you, Salesforce, for your continued support. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for today's discussion, Yai Vargas. Yai is Hacer's Vice President of Strategic Engagement and Initiatives. Welcome, Yai.
Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate you. And thank you for playing those beautiful videos from our sponsors. I love the emotion that we see in those videos. I have the pleasure and the honor of introducing our two accomplished guest panelists today on our Allyship webinar. They are going to be sharing their personal and professional stories of allyship and we'll be answering some of your questions during our Q&A portion. So please, if you're watching from any of our social media platforms, please drop in a question as we begin the conversations. Because when we get to the area of Q&A, I am going to look out for your question and pose them to our panelists. First, I want to welcome Susie Collins. Susie Collins is the Senior Director of Equality Strategy at Salesforce, one of our sponsors. Susie leads the global development of the strategy there. And before joining Salesforce, she held roles in diversity, equity, and inclusion at Amazon Web Services, Nordstrom, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She has completed fellowships with the Aspen Institute Latino Society program, where actually we met in person in Aspen, Colorado a few years ago. She's also done some work with Hispanics in Philanthropy and the Salzburg Global Seminar. She's originally from Lima, Peru, which I am happy to say that I've visited such a beautiful country. And now, Susie, welcome to the virtual stage. Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, either personally or professionally.
Thanks so much, Jai. Thanks, everyone, for being here as well virtually. It's a pleasure of sharing the space with you today. And hola a todos. My name is Susie Collins. My pronouns are she and her. I am currently in New York City at the Salesforce Tower overlooking at Bryant Park on my right. Super excited of being here and share the time with you. A bit of it about me. I'm a woman of color. I'm a Latinx immigrant who came to the US 18 years ago. I'm also a mother of two boys, Oliver and Joaquin, and a caregiver to my mother. And I'm based in Los Angeles, California. And I share this with you because this is part of who I am. Some things that you can see and some things that you cannot, but that makes me unique, like each of us. I am a Senior Director of Global Strategy at Salesforce. I recently joined mid-summer of this year. I have the pleasure of working with colleagues from across the world to enable a vision and a framework on how we amplify equality across the world, including LATAM, APAC, and EMEA. I'm also working with our employee success teams to ensure that we have a very authentic and unique approach to our Latinx engagement, both for hiring and development, as well as retention. Thanks, Jai.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susie. So next we have Alex Rhodes. Alex serves as the head of diversity and inclusion for global banking and international at Bank of America. In this role, he leads a global team covering 30 countries to deliver on Bank of America's promise of being a great place to work. He is also enterprise strategy lead for the bank's global LGBTQ+ executive council, where he has championed gender expansive strategies and inclusion summits, where you're going to hear all about that today. He also joins us from Los Angeles. Alex, welcome, and please tell us a little bit more about yourself, either personally or professionally.
Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I've been fortunate to be a part of the Acer family for several years in my role at Bank of America, working with external partners like you to help increase representation and to really bring such a powerful message to corporate America about the power of the Hispanic Latino community, not only the economy that you have and bring to this country and around the world, but the immense leadership opportunities there are for all of us to be a part of. Susie, our worlds have to collide at some point, being based in Los Angeles, and you're sitting at Bryant Park. That's normally where I sit when I'm in New York City as well with the bank. So one of these cross-country trips, we'll make sure we're in person together. When I think about my journey, it really does come back to allyship. And that's about being a visible representative to so many different communities. While I identify and a part of the LGBTQ+ community, I know that our backgrounds and identities are many and intersectional. And when we can be a part of different communities and learn to advocate and grow and practice equity and empathy on our pathway to equality, we know we've got more work to do. So I hope today's discussion allows us to get into some of these topics, talk about how companies who may be in different stages of their journey can really come together in allyship. I know it's meant the world to me to be in a room, in a forum like this. I come today to listen and learn and understand. Every time I've been a part of the Acer family, I always take away something that makes me a better ally and advocate for your community. And I see that as part of my role. As a white male majority, there are plenty of opportunities for all of us to come together. Inclusion really means and unites us all. So looking forward to today's conversation. Lots to discuss.
Love that. Thank you so much for opening up that space as well. So for all of you watching, as Andrea mentioned earlier, allyship is the word of the year, as noted in dictionary.com. This term, allyship, has been around since the 1800s and has recently gained traction following the summer of 2020 and the death of George Floyd. White allies and the word allyship proliferated as racial justice demonstrations spread throughout the country. Before that, straight allies joined the causes of LGBTQ oppression, discriminalization, and marginalization. Today, we're here to learn from Latinx professionals like Susie, right? Myself, and all of our gained experiences, as well as allies like Alex, who are actively playing a role in allyship, both personally and professionally practicing it. From this conversation, you'll learn how to apply some of these practices in your roles at your organizations to be able to help your organization be a much more inclusive place to work for everyone, regardless of how they identify. My first question is for Susie. So Susie, I'd love to begin with you. Given that allyship, the word, has evolved over time, and especially with the murder of George Floyd and how we've seen dictionary.com say, wow, this has blown up tremendously. Can you please share with us how the concept of allyship has evolved for you personally in the workplace over the past 2 years, given the civil and racial unrest?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's so important to start the conversation with that. As you mentioned, what happened last year with the global movement for Black Lives Matter was so inspiring. I personally never witnessed a movement like that around racial equality and justice, so large in scale. And I was really moved also by the impact that has created in society globally. Also because large companies either had the opportunity to continue to do the work, and some other companies finally began to do the work. And at Salesforce, we've leaned into really listening to our employees from across our employee resource groups, or we also call them equality groups, and making sure that the company and employees are proactively listening and practicing allyship. And again, when you think about allyship, we have this very practical framework, which really speaks about 4 things: asking questions, listening, showing up, and speaking up for underrepresented communities. For some of us, it might be easier to make a donation to an organization, which, by the way, racial equity organizations are in need of our support, our financial support. But I think it's also very important to think personally and professionally. For me, my both lives collide, so I only have one, and look inward and understand, how am I driving racial equality within my community, in my workplace? So that often is doing like the inward work, the hard work of mitigating our own biases, of questioning our intentions, of investigating some of the societal norms that maybe some of us were introduced as children. That's something that I started doing about 8 years ago when I joined or when I led the Latinx ERG at a prior organization, and I haven't stopped then, right? So that's what I really think. For me, allyship, it's a continuation, it's a work in progress. It doesn't have an end date. I think it's so important that we think about allyship as that. And then many of the conversations, began last year with Black Lives Matter, but continue with the Stop Asian Hate movement, which brings the topic of intersectionality and how important it is that we support one another and understand our struggles as a way to lift up each other. So when we talk about people with disabilities, we're also talking about people of color. When we talk about women, we're also talking about women in the LGBTQI community. And that's partially, what has helped me, Jai, to become a better ally, is to continue to do the work and not have an end date.
I love that. And I love that you recognize that some of this conversation within ourselves needs to be revisited. So some of that is unlearning, like you mentioned, some of those societal norms that we've grown up to learn and feel that are just normal and part of our everyday lives. And so I love that you're constantly redoing that work of tapping into who you are and what you learned growing up to then evolve to this newer Susie.
Thank you. And I will say, for those who are watching, some of you might relate to my story as an immigrant. And growing up in Lima in a beautiful, lovely home, my parents, I think, have done a good job in raising me, but there is a lot of colorism, right? So being Latina does not disqualify me from fully understanding the spectrum of race. As a person of color, I continue to invest in my own learning to be a racial equity champion. And again, that's, I think, sometimes a misconception that we think that, we as people of color might not have to do the work. I think as a Latina, I definitely have to be part of the change.
Absolutely. I love that. And so now my next question is for you, Alex. Alex, as you've seen this year, we've seen an increase of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts amongst individuals as well as organizations. Can you share with us one example of how you or Bank of America have gone above and beyond to make allyship, this topic that we're talking about today, a business imperative, something that you put at the forefront and go above and beyond what we see as surface level allyship?
Absolutely. And I want to just echo some points that Susie made, because Susie, I think you were spot on in talking about, as we learn to be better allies, it's about the understanding of each other. And I think that's what we've seen over the last 2 years, is that people truly wanting to understand each other more and to create that opportunity for advocacy. And you said it best, it starts with some of those simple questions. And I think when we think about allyship, it really is a check-in. It's a, how are you doing? Simply asking that question can allow people to create that opening for understanding and wanting to engage with each other. And oftentimes for allies, working with another community or starting to engage in the community can be the most difficult part. And it's often why we see allyship not achieve its full potential, because that first question of just engaging someone and asking, how are you doing, is so critical. I'll take that to some of our business imperatives, to your question around, it really does start with the top. If you're sitting in a company today that doesn't have a CEO that is championing this work and making it a clear business imperative, whether you're in a resource group, whether you're an executive leading a line of business or a new joiner from a campus program, make your voice heard about how important these topics are, that allyship and advocacy is for each other. It really does start at the top. Our CEO, before he became the CEO more than 11 years ago, he's been the chair of our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council. The council has been in existence for 20 years. So I think for organizations, you really do have to put in the time. Now, everyone is at a different place in their journey. I think companies who have most recently started their journey just in the last couple of years can actually grow the fastest, because there's now so much information available and these topics are so important. But for it to become a business imperative, it has to be at the top of the agenda, at management team meetings, at local team meetings, at town halls. You've got to be able to bring that in. One of the best ways to do that is to measure and manage representation. And I think that includes being transparent about the progress that you're making. Many companies, Bank of America included, are producing annual reports. Ours is called the Human Capital Management Report, that shares the detail around representation. And it's not hiding behind POC, it's detailing Black and Hispanic and Asian numbers at all levels of our company. And I think you have to get that kind of buy-in where it's measured like other business results are in order for progress to be made. And then all of us as allies and advocates need to champion the work. But when our companies put it at the top of their list, we know it has the opportunity for success. One of the quick thing I'll mention is that in relation to George Floyd, in those post months, the second half of 2020, we had more than 160,000 employees participate in these courageous conversations on race. And just like Susie said, one of those detailed conversations we had was around colorism, because we know even within communities of color, there are biases that exist. If you have a brain, you have bias. And you have to be able to check some of those biases and understand them even in our own communities. So a couple of things I wanted to share there, but it does have to be a business imperative that starts at the top.
Thank you for sharing that, Alex. And that first question that you asked is so simple, yet so powerful. How are you doing? Is not something that we hear very often in the workplace, because people are sometimes setting up too many boundaries or are scared to ask about someone's personal life. But that enables you to learn about their experience and their stories. And I'm sure that as this conversation progresses, we're going to learn so much more about you both. I also love the report that you're all doing on human capital management. Is that a public report that anyone can access?
Public report, anyone can access. You can Google Bank of America Human Capital Management Report or go out to our site and find it there. It is a resource that, again, I think more and more companies, I know Salesforce is a major champion of this, certainly Pepsi is as well, to be able to talk about the diversity metrics. It's holding ourselves accountable, but it's also creating the transparency for our teammates. And I think that's the other piece is we talk about underrepresented groups and we talk about allyship. We have to think that the burden is not on the underrepresented group to solve their issues. It really is on all of us coming together to be a part of the solution. I counsel senior leaders often, and it can't be you introduce the panel on diversity and inclusion and then you check out. You have to roll up your sleeves. If you're sitting in that majority, you've got to stand shoulder to shoulder with underrepresented groups to truly be advocates in this work. So I think those are things that when we think about business imperatives, it really is about all of us.
I love that. And it's always about understanding how to measure some of these successes that we've set up in these programs. The fact that this human capital management report is public is something that we can all use. We have so many of our viewers that follow ASER that are always asking the question,
Susie, looks like it's you and me.
Yes, let's take over.
We can do it.
here I am. Somebody, well, thank you. It looks like somebody put me backstage, but I'm back. And so I was just telling the audience, it's important to find reports like this one from Bank of America so that you can use this to guide you in setting up some of those metrics of success and systems. The next question that I have is for Susie. Susie, I've known you for a couple of years, and I know that you've been doing this work a long time, especially for those underrepresented voices in your personal life, as well as at all of these incredible organizations that you've worked with. Can you please share with us, from a personal perspective, what groups you are personally an ally to, and how you've strategically, programmatically, monetarily been helping or supporting them be at the forefront?
Thanks, Jai. And I think the first thing that I've always done in the workplace is joining all the employee resource groups, not just the ones that match my identity as a Latina or as a woman, but also those that are those that actually where I need to learn the most, right? They're a huge source of information. I just came earlier today, and I'm sorry if you can hear the New York sirens in the background, from the Hispanic Leadership Summit put together by one of our partners, the We Are All Human Foundation. And at that event, I learned that 95% of Fortune 100 companies have an ERGs. So, ERGs, they started over 50 years ago. So that's a great way for me to learn, to educate myself, but also to use my own sphere of influence and my privileges to advocate and advance others from underrepresented communities. So I would say that's the first one. The second one is the education piece, and investing, my waking hours. Again, my personal and professional lives collide. So I'm always learning, including, weekends or evenings if I have time to read. Most likely I'm reading about an aspect of, how to become an ally to groups that I don't represent. But the education and not centering in waiting for others to teach me, but rather seeking out for that information and centering the information on those who are underrepresented. Also learning how to apologize, and own my own mistakes. And, I've learned the hard way. And I have also learned that most likely I will make another mistake, especially when talking about groups that I'm not part of. So being humble, but also sharing, this is coming from Amber Cabral, an author and a DI leader that I look up to. A very simple way to apologize. I'm sorry because, fill out the blank. In the future, I will, fill out the blank. So I teach that to my kids. I try to practice that, anytime I made a mistake. So those are some ways in which I personally, I'm becoming an ally. And again, I don't give the title to myself, right? It's not like I'm going to put my, a little badge and say I'm an ally. I think the communities that I'm advocating for should give me that title rather than the other way around. And using, again, that sphere of influence. For example, there's a speaking event. I might give out my spot for someone else, who has the opportunity to use that platform for visibility. Being a sponsor, right? So and a mentor, I make the decision that, in my limited time as a working mom, and also I was very active as a board member with a couple of organizations in Seattle before I moved to LA this summer, that I was going to use my mentorship, sponsorship hours for leaders who wanted to start or continue a career in DEI from the Black community. And that was very much because I have an amazing mentor. Her name is Deb Ilam, and she might be in this call. She's a Black women leader, and she spent that time with me for that coaching. So paid it forward to other communities, I think is very important. And I can give you so many examples, but I think the instances in which I have better understood my own journey on allyship is because I've received that support from many folks across my career. And most recently, I joined Salesforce. I knew they were a great company to work for, but I experienced just 2 weeks after I started a family hardship, something that was totally unexpected, and something that put me out of work for quite a while, for a few weeks. And I have a lot of team members who don't have kids, yet they show so much compassion and care for my son as I was helping him recover from a health issue, which he's thriving right now. And I'm so happy, and I'm public about it because I want to demystify, right, the fact that we don't have real lives. And it was very unexpected, but the love and care that I receive from my team and my leaders, make me not just more appreciative, but also more focused and more driven to continue to do the work to advance equality at Salesforce and beyond.
I'm so happy to hear that your son.
Susie, I'm glad your son is doing well.
Thank you. Thank you. I get pictures from my partner, every day since I'm traveling the past 2 days, and he's just doing great. He's almost 3.
He's a
Thank
little baby still. I'm so glad that he's healthy and well. Susie, something that you mentioned that was so beautiful is learning how to apologize, because that's something that our audience is very focused on, not wanting to make a mistake when talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. Perhaps making the mistake of misgendering someone or misrepresenting a community is something so many people have a fear of, that they just remove themselves completely from the conversation sometimes. And I love how easy you made it sound. I'm sorry for, and in the future I will. And it's something that you teach your children, and it's great for us as adults because it should be that casual and authentic and easy.
And it really brings up that accountability piece, right? So it's not a passive apology. I'm sorry I make you feel this way, but I'm sorry because I did this, so I'm owning it. And in the future, I will really carry that accountability. So another page for Amber Cabral on her book on allyship. I cannot post it, but maybe someone can, because she's a great leader.
Susie, I would build on that concept of that you've just described. And I think about it, as an ally that has to transcend many communities, not only within my own LGBTQ plus community, but many of the different race and ethnic and religious and other communities that I cross over. It really is about giving grace. And allyship is a two-way street. You just made a really great, and if anybody's writing down tips of allyship, the first thing you made it personal. You just shared that story about your son. And in order to open up to others, you really do have to start by sharing your experiences about diversity or about something that's happening personally in your life, so that people, allies, advocates for you, can be invested in you and your success and well-being. But allyship is a two-way street. As much as our communities seek allies, right, we also have to allow allies to enter our communities. And many times we want those allies, but we're not willing to give grace. And I think that might even come before apologies, right? Knowing that someone is going to make a mistake, just as the Hispanic Latino community and certainly the Latina community has given me lots of grace in my learnings and understanding. It's that accepting and understanding that it's okay. I know you're learning. You're coming from a place of positive intent. And I think when we can really, don't hesitate to ask for help, but no matter what community we might be advocating for or seeking allies and advocates to our community, starting with giving grace, I think has just been, it just takes that stress off of wanting to be an ally and running into a situation and maybe making that mistake that you have to apologize for. But I certainly see it a lot in many of the communities that I represent.
I love that, Alex. I think that you should write a book on grace and allyship.
Well, you've got to put words into practice. So I guess maybe, writing a book is one thing. Certainly those words are part of it, but now it really is putting it into practice, and it's showing up in being visible in communities and showing that support. And Susie, some of your best practices there about, giving opportunity for others to step up. And I think that's key in a lot of leadership positions, that there is that next leader that does need those exposure opportunities and needs those leader experiences. What can we do to elevate those? I know I was proud after a couple of years of managing the ASER relationship to turn it over to Danielle Rodriguez, who is a proud Latina from Colombia that has taken it to the next level. But how I've been able to not only learn from her, but she's been able to learn from my experiences. It's about setting up and paying it forward as allies. It's so important to make those public commitments and then to put those words into practice.
I love that. Danielle is a phenomenal partner of ours from Bank of America. So she filled your shoes beautifully. Alex, I have a question for you, and you mentioned this earlier on in your comments. Another word that we hear about a lot within the diversity, equity, and inclusion space is intersectionality. So let's talk a little bit about intersectionality. Now that we've been in the hybrid work scenario for some time, almost 2 years now. How have you or your organization, Bank of America, developed an allyship model or a practice that supports and encourages underrepresented voice across your organization that spans many different countries? How do you bring in those people from across the world to make sure that they are being included into the conversation and are being heard?
Yeah, I mean, the concept of intersectionality to me, while it's becoming a newer buzzword, or maybe not even that new anymore for the last several years, but I think it's the key to unlocking even greater participation and engagement across communities. And I say that because many times in our affinity or our community, we talk about a topic, but we look at it one-dimensionally, and we don't bring in the multiple identities. Susie talking about being a mother, a Latina, a working mother, a female, all these different identities. She is not one identity. I'm not one identity. None of us are. But we have to be able to look at the work that we're doing around diversity, equity, inclusion through those multiple identities. So here's an example. And I'll use an LGBTQ plus example and a Hispanic Latino example. So during Pride Month this past June, our HOLA employee resource group, which, by the way, talking about intersectionality, is 40% non-Hispanic Latino. So 17,000 members of our employee resource group, 40% are allies or advocates outside of the community. So you've already started to create intersectionality just by welcoming others in allyship. But by bringing together the LGBTQ plus community and the Hispanic Latino community, you suddenly open up and unlock so many different topics, whether that is, because of cultural or religious, as to how people feel accepted in the community who identify as LGBTQ plus. Leaders being able to share their journeys, mothers who are parenting trans youth who are maybe gender fluid or gender non-conforming, topics that a mother in the Hispanic Latino community may have never felt comfortable bringing forward before. But when you bring together the LGBTQ plus lens and see the support from multiple communities, you now create even more engagement. And maybe typically we would have had, let's call it on a good day, a couple hundred people attend an LGBTQ plus event. By bringing in the Hispanic Latino lens, we had over 600 people attend the event. And people who are Hispanic Latino who would have never thought they were going to attend or have the lens around LGBTQ plus, now having their own identity and potentially a new identity. So when you think about growing your employee resource groups, when you think about creating advocacy and allyship models, just bringing people into the conversation is the easiest way to create some of that intersectionality.
I love that. And it's also important to mention a university professor out of the West Coast. Her name is Kimberly Crenshaw. She actually coined the term back in the 1980s, intersectionality. For some of those that are watching here today, if you want to get more familiar with some of this terminology that we've been covering, active allyship, equity, inclusion, belonging, and intersectionality, make sure that you reach out to us. We have an extensive amount of research and information that we can share with you, as well as following our incredible panelists today. If you're watching from social media, please feel free to drop any questions that you may have for our panelists in the chat. We have some incredible people on the ASER team that are going to be sending those questions to me so that I can share them with our panelists. The first question that I have here for any one of you, either Alex or Susie, is actually from a good friend of mine who's watching from social media, Peter Garcia, who's an attorney. And he's asking, it would be great to hear how allyship is achieved in partnership with the employee resource groups amongst either Bank of America or at Salesforce. So if either one of you want to elaborate on that question.
I can give you an answer, Jai. What I have seen with Salesforce, the WINForce, which is the Indigenous Employee Resource Group, our Black Employee Network, as well as our Latinx, Latino Force, Equality Group come together in our marquee annual event called Representation Matters. to use their voices, their platforms, and their influence to increase visibility about their identities. So I think that's a really good way in how they partner from an ally perspective to share that space, but also as in an intersectional way, because some of them might represent more than one of those racial identities. So I love that event. If you haven't attended before, you can find the virtual recording on our equality site. And the next one for next year will be happening, I believe, in Q2. And it's open to anyone who wants to attend, and virtual and free. So that's a value added.
The only thing I would add to that, Susie, is just personal stories are so important to being able to create that understanding, to create the pathways to advocacy and allyship. Intersectional is certainly part of it, the multiple identities we have, but the more events where you can bring different groups together and being intentional about it, looking at those panelists and understanding their identities and creating a forum where those identities can come through, only I think attracts more people into your employee resource group. Again, what we've seen from an attendance bump, not only are we streamlining, so there are more high quality events, right? But we're also increasing the participation of it and showing our employees as being more than just one dimensional or more than just understanding the specific affinity that you're a part of. The other thing I think that employee resource groups can do is when you think about public commitment, what is your company doing externally to the clients and communities that you serve? Bank of America announced a 5-year, $1.25 billion commitment to Black and Hispanic communities. We then extended to our Asian teammates and communities as well, because we know how important that is at all parts of the life cycle of communities. And we know $1 billion here is not going to solve racial equality or economic opportunity, but we want to be a catalyst for others to join. And we have seen many other companies do that, and partner organizations, great examples with ASER. We've been able to use that funding to be the Latina champion sponsor. So it's doubling down on representation in the Hispanic Latino community, but specifically around women of color. What can we do to help increase representation in our companies because of that? So I think making that public commitment and having your employee resource groups be a part of that is also key to being allies across multiple communities.
I love that. The next question that I have is, how can we promote more allyship by senior executive leaders that are perhaps a little bit busy to be able to get in on the ground level when it comes to these employee resource group events? Do you have any best practices that you can share with us on how you're bringing in some senior executive leaders to the conversation?
I can share a bit about my work. I think most recently in my prior organization, working with senior leaders. As I get myself acquainted with Salesforce as a new employee, I'm sure I'm going to use some of those tactics. But I think commonality is an area which we have to focus when we want to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. I think when you have the opportunity to talk to an executive because you're an ERG leader or because you have opportunity to meet with leaders, find that commonality, because believe it or not, we have more things in common that we don't, right? So maybe you're also a parent, or you have been to Peru, or you are from the same neighborhood that I live. I mean, I'm just making up things here. But once you find that commonality, I think it opens up an opportunity to be more open-minded and to help the leader start or continue their allyship journey. So for me, it starts with dialogue and exposure and also accountability, right? Because if they ask me, can you share more about your culture? Is there something that I can do? I'm going to give you some guidance. But I would love for you to come back and share with me, how is that working out for you? So treating folks with respect and dignity, but at the same time, I think accountability and measure that impact in the organization is very important.
Well said, Susie. I think the accountability piece is key. Business leaders talk about the business imperative. You've got to be able to elevate the business imperative to make this key to your work. Every business leader understands that more diverse teams create and are more productive and can contribute more to their organization. So you've got an amazing business case that you start with to get business leaders there. We, and I'm sure many other groups do as well, we take a novel approach in terms of executive sponsors and really getting them closer to the employee resource groups. So we have employee resource groups with executive sponsors who are senior leaders, and then our diverse executive council, like our Hispanic Latino executive council that has over 250 members in it, who are senior executives at the company. They have a management team member, so a direct report to the CEO actually chairs and advises that council and is not of the same affinity, but is creating those connect and bond points that Susie talked about, that commonality, so that we really can see business leaders connecting with wider audiences, driving results, and ultimately accountability. But another great thing that we do is an annual Diversity and Inclusion Awards that are sponsored by our lines of business. We had more than 3,000 people be nominated for Diversity and Inclusion Awards. Ultimately, about 700 people were selected for those awards, but to have that many people apply for it, that lines of business are doing the review of the awards and selecting individuals, it creates that connectivity to the work that people are doing in the community and in our company.
I love that. We have another question from our social media streaming, and it says, can you talk about what started each of your paths to allyship and what made you want to become an ally? So Alex, specifically for you, what made you want to become an ally for Latina professionals at Bank of America? And you, Susie, you actually mentioned to me before, you are an ally to underrepresented communities like perhaps the disability community or the veterans community or English as a second language community. So if either of you would want to talk about that as well.
I continue to be first. I will go on.
That's me being an ally to my Latinas.
I think you're very modest, but yes, I can share a couple of things. I lived in San Francisco about 15 years ago or so, and that's when I did my first Pride Walk, and I started volunteering with the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And I think to me that was a pivotal moment, one that I haven't forgotten. It feels like, a life ago, but it exposed me to just a whole new set of values. It exposed me to a community that I was really removed. Both, I think, because there's so much stigma where I grew up around the LGBTQI community, but also because I didn't extend myself to that community. So as an ally to the LGBTQI community, I feel that my life has become better, right? Because I now can better understand the struggles that the folks experience within that community, but also the beautiful experiences that they have. And how do I use my sphere of influence to promote the care for them? And I think a good example from Salesforce is we recently expanded our benefits for transgender and non-conforming people. We should make sure that we post them on the chat, but they're very comprehensive, and the reaction that we've received from the community has been really positive. And I don't think many companies do what Salesforce is doing right now. So that's one example, Jai, around what has motivated me as I look at my thread, as my journey. It started like 15 years ago or so with that community.
I'll share a more recent example that certainly opened my eyes to the Hispanic Latino community and created empathy, if not radical empathy, from moment one. And it was actually at an ASER event. We're in a room with 300 plus people in it. And for a bank teammate to stand up and share a personal story, and they said, you have no idea how good it feels to be in a room where everyone can pronounce my name. And something like that of understanding, my role as an ally and advocate, it could be as simple as learning how to pronounce someone's name correctly in a community or a language that's not my first language. And experiences like that are your other parts of the Hispanic Latino community where, again, based on a time and place of their journey coming to America or assimilating with culture, they were told not to speak Spanish and to only speak English. And today don't speak English, Spanish well, and don't know if they can be a part of the Hispanic Latino community. Or they've changed their name to an Americanized, and it's not a name that they represent, and they, gave up a part of themselves to assimilate. And I think today what we're seeing is people returning and bringing their whole selves to work, knowing that who they really are is so important. So I guess when I think about my ally journey, it's being in the room and understanding those perspectives and how I can better advocate for the community. And that goes back to this whole conversation. Allyship is about equity. And I think when we look at underrepresented communities, it's about creating equal access to opportunities. And if I can help the Hispanic Latino community, especially the Latina community, level up so that those top level opportunities are available to you because of work that I've done, then I've succeeded as an ally and an advocate. And if I can get others to see the importance of that too, it only empowers not only those who are seeking to be allies, but it really empowers the community as a whole.
Thank you so much for doing that. And I want to give you both an opportunity to take a few moments to share with us anything that we may not have covered, where we can find you, support you, or continue to applaud the work that you're doing. So I'd love to start with you, Susie. Share with us anything that we haven't been able to cover during this conversation, or where we can find you and continue to support you.
Thanks, Jai. I just want to thank you and everyone who's behind the scenes, who supported the webinar from the ASER group. Thank you so much, as well as my colleagues and everyone who's watching live. You can find me on LinkedIn, but you can find, most importantly, Salesforce. We have so many opportunities, job opportunities. We have an Ohana culture, which is a family culture. I find a direct connection with the Latino community. It's not very individual, but rather we're thinking not just about our progress, but how do we lift up our community? And that's how I feel here at Salesforce. I feel valued, respected, and seen. And that ultimately shows up in, finding that place of belonging, where I can be my best self and I don't have to cover aspects of my identity. So with that, Alex, anything you want to say?
Thanks, Susie. It really does come down to, we all know what it feels like to be excluded. And our minds can immediately race to that time in our lives, which could be as recent as today or as child or any point in our lives where we know what that feeling of being excluded is. What does it mean to feel included and to create that environment where you belong? One of our recent commercials was titled, "We See You Because We Are You." And I think that's what's so key. And to be able to say that about corporate America, I don't know if we could have said that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. The progress that we've made, while still more to go, I think is proving and opening doors to even more people. And I think maybe one topic we didn't cover as much, and a little bit around the recruiting, but even the campus piece, right? To have some of the most diverse campus class ever entering corporate America says so much about what the future is going to be of corporate America. Certainly can't look back 5, 10, 15 years ago and see 50+% POC entering corporate America. So while we're continuing to grow our representation, the future is bright when it comes to those that are on campus today who are looking to corporate America, that can see themselves in corporate America and want to join and be a part of this important work, not only for their career and professional growth, but hopefully for their personal growth and what they can give back to companies and even to the next generation. We know Gen Z is more diverse than ever, both in where they may sit in the LGBTQ+ spectrum, to where they sit in neurodiversity, to where they sit in the communities that they identify with, or the communities they don't identify with, and the lack of labels that they want. But it just shows that all of us have to continue to evolve. The future is bright, and I'm excited to continue my journey of allyship and appreciate ASER and all the work. Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's always great to connect with people, but always happy to be a part of these conversations. And thank you for the invite.
And thank you both so much. For those of you watching, you heard it from Susie and Alex. If you want to be part of the conversation and you want to level up your career, please reach out to the Salesforce community as well as the Bank of America recruiting community. If you're joining us on social media, you'll see that we have dropped in some incredible resources. We'll make sure to drop in those career sites as well. Thank you, Susie and Alex, for such a great conversation on allyship and all of the work that you have done for some time and continue to do. And for those of you who joined us today, I hope you were able to write down some of these examples shared today so that you can reflect on how to apply them in the work that you do at your organization. It's important to remember that as an ally, you don't speak up for someone in an underrepresented community, but you stand alongside them. You bring them into spaces and conversations they typically wouldn't be invited to, and you make it your personal business to make sure they receive fair access to opportunities. Please remember to connect with our panelists, Susie Collins, as well as Alex Rhodes on LinkedIn. And please post and tag Acer using the hashtag HACR so that we can find and support you and make sure that we give you so many more resources that you can use to level up your personal and professional journey at your organization. I would now like to welcome back Andrea from Acer, who's going to thank our sponsors and close out our webinar for today on allyship. Andrea, thank you so much.
For leading this discussion. And once again, thank you to our panelists. Some of the takeaways that I made a note of were check in with each other, ask how are you doing, be a supportive sponsor, think of who you might be able to take your spot when the opportunity arises, learn how to apologize and give grace, and remember that allyship is a work in progress. Continue investing in your own learning, and you just took one step by being with us here today. So with that, thanks to our December webinar sponsors, Salesforce and PepsiCo. And thanks to all of you for participating. We hope you enjoyed the discussion today, and we invite you to stay posted on our upcoming events for 2022. We'll have more free webinars, and our first in-person event, or our first event of 2022, will be the hybrid Acer third annual Latina Empower Summit, March 21st through the 23rd in Orlando, Florida. And you can register for that right now. And just a few save the dates. Our executive programs will happen June 6th through the 8th in Los Angeles. The Acer Annual Symposium will happen September 26th through the 28th, also in Los Angeles. And the Leadership Pipeline Program will happen October 26th through 27th in Miami. So visit our website, acer.org, and follow us on social media. Have a wonderful year end, and we hope to see you all next year.